Hey everyone, welcome to SLO City Church at home, online, wherever you are. I'm really stoked to be with you today. My name is Brent, humbled to be the lead pastor here at SLO City, a place where everyone is welcome. No matter if you are buttoned up, tatted up, jacked up, uptight, somewhere in between, this is a place for you and I to help one another find and follow Jesus, because we believe in Jesus is hope, and there is hope for every single one. We're excited to start and jump into a new series today, so let's get rolling. I was reading this week about a man named Martin Seligman. He is an American psychologist, an author, a TED talker, so you know he's legit. But Martin Seligman is known as the father of positive psychology. He's an expert on topics such as optimism, positive thinking, learned helplessness, which I found interesting. It's an interesting phrase, and happiness. He is an expert on happiness, a pretty big title to live up to. Now, Seligman writes often about how human beings, and Americans specifically, tend to live life through a lens with eyes that look for what makes me happy. What is it in life that makes me happy and feel happiness? So he studied this, and he writes a lot about a tension that he notices in this pursuit of happiness. He noticed this paradox of happiness. He writes that many of us live life thinking about what we can get and what we can get more of to make us happy. And this drive for happiness often leads you and I to focus on ourselves, to focus on me and what's mine and I to get happiness. But what the tension he noticed and the paradox he noticed is that he's also seen culturally this increase in depression. And his research finds that, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, focusing on me, focusing on mine and on I doesn't actually make me the happiest. Doesn't often make me even happier. He noticed this paradox. Seligman believed that actually focusing on other people's needs brings more fulfillment and pleasure to one's life. So he set out to prove it. Seligman gathered some people and he did an experiment. And in his study, he had people go out and do something completely selfish and self-focused. He said, hey, go splurge, go buy a new outfit, go crush that ice cream, go treat yourself, go set out to experience something or an adventure, all focused on you. You deserve it. And then he had those same people go out and do something awesome for someone else, to do something selfless for someone else, some intentional act of kindness or generosity or compassion, something self-sacrificial, something focused on other people. And then he noted the results. He had people even write down what they felt. And he wrote, the results were life-changing. The afterglow of the pleasurable or selfish activity, whatever it was, paled in comparison to the one selfless act for someone else. This secular psychologist does this experiment in his pursuit of and his study of happiness, in his pursuit of and his study of what is causing us to be depressed and lonely and apart. And he notices this response, this paradox of happiness. See, we are living for me and mine, but what he says, this afterglow was found. There was this benefit to actually selflessness and focusing on the needs of others. You may have heard this before or experienced this before, that focusing on the needs of other people brings this deep fulfillment, this glow. This past Christmas, my daughter got the opportunity to take some Christmas presents to a friend who would not have received Christmas presents otherwise. And it was really special. And the afterglow I saw on my daughter was bright. She lit up in focusing on the needs and blessing someone else. And yet there's still this tension, isn't there? Because you and I live in a world and in a culture that screams at us, it's all about you. Live for you. You go do it. You go make memories. You care about you and have these experiences and live it up and buy that new thing and splurge on you. There's this tension, isn't there? This pull, this back and forth. Do I live for me and do I focus on me or do I focus on others and what makes me happy and what's the purpose of life? And we can live in this culture of being consumed with me and mine. I was really excited. Past couple months, we sent out a survey for our church, and last November, and I was floored just to kind of read some of the responses. For one, it's just cool to get a glimpse into what our church, what the felt needs are, and what people really care about. Some of the results I read. First, you got to know, I love our church, and I love the authenticity of our church. I love the care for people. I love that the survey says that you and I, that this church is hungry for spiritual formation, to grow in Jesus, to grow personally like Jesus and into the image of Jesus. And number two, this church is hungry. This is a collection of people that is hungry to connect to one another in community, to be together people. Number three, I was floored at how many people say they are passionate about learning how to share their faith with others and how their faith intersects with the culture around them. And then in this, we had an open forum, kind of just write what you want about what you want to see. And there's just this passion and excitement to caring for the needs of a city, to helping people, ideas, big ways to pull people together, to feed the hungry and provide for the sick and the needy. I love that our church has this heart and has this passion and has this hunger to make a difference. I think all of us get this need in the world to make a difference. And yet we feel this pull to live for ourselves, to focus on ourselves, to fulfill our needs, to make us happier. And yet Seligman writes, there's this paradox, there's this back and forth, because making a difference matters. We all feel this paradox and this tension. The question today is, how do you and I make a difference? How do you and I live for others and experience impact in a culture that says it's all about me? What do we do? How do we share our faith? And how do we make an impact? And how do we have influence? And how do we bring hope to everyone? For the next several weeks, I'm really excited to kind of take an intentional look at the way that Jesus made a difference. What the characteristics of Jesus were as he made a difference. What are the characteristics you see right now of influencers or of people today? It's usually marketing strategy. It's usually create a buzz. It's usually drum up all this money. And get this, Jesus did things differently. I don't know if you knew this. Jesus stepped onto the scene and was born in a nowhere town of 100 people to poor, insignificant parents. Jesus' dad was a builder, his mom, a teenager. Jesus was practically homeless as an adult. He traveled around and he stayed wherever he could, and he lived off the generosity of others. He made next to no money. No money. Jesus didn't make any money, and somehow we are here. You are listening to a church podcast, and we are gathering on a parking lot because of the way Jesus made a difference. And see this, get this. Jesus did not live his life for me, mine, and him. He didn't live his life selfishly. There were times that Jesus was pressed and encouraged to run for office. He didn't do it. People tried to get him to start a riot, to fight back, to create this massive military resistance. He didn't. People were pressing him, become a king. Nope. Times that he was pressured to market himself and take power and influence and woo the big crowds. But he didn't. He pushed all that away. You see, the way of Jesus wasn't me, more experiences, more memories, more stuff to put in my house, more things to make me feel good in the moment. It wasn't bigger. It wasn't better. It wasn't about selfishness. It wasn't about a bigger building or a brand or bumper stickers. The way of Jesus was this way. It was selflessness. And it was make a difference, create an impact Change people's lives one at a time. We're going to start a new series called One at a Time, and it's our hope over the next few weeks that you and I would see and get and catch the one at a time way of Jesus and how it impacts your life and mine and how it can lead you and I to make a difference in the world around us and to change the lives of those around us, one person at a time. So we're going to kick off the series today. I want to look at something, this is where we're going. I want to look at something that Jesus taught. I want to look at something that Jesus did, somebody he interacted with. And then I want to lay out just a simple challenge for you and I to live out this one at a time way of Jesus. What Jesus taught. Time and time again, we see in these as we open up the Gospels, we see these little moments of these little interactions with Jesus, and it's in conversations, and it's as Jesus is on the road, or he's going from here to there, or he's entering a town that he would come to a well, that we get a glimpse of these moments where Jesus is talking to one person or a couple people. He's having this intentional conversation, and we pick up these teachings of Jesus birthed out of these real life moments, these interruptible moments of Jesus. And today we're going to open up to Luke chapter 15 just for a moment to see what Jesus has taught. You may have heard this before. Stick with me. Luke chapter 15, verse 1, it says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around Jesus to hear him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered," get this, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Jesus, on one of his journeys, walking through town, has struck up a conversation with tax collectors and sinners. These people were notorious for their behavior, notorious for their lifestyle. Some of them were sinning for a living. Some of them have fallen into this pattern of sin, pattern of living their life in a direction opposite of maybe what God had desired. And they are hanging out with Jesus, God in the flesh, the Messiah. They are chopping it up. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law see this. And they start to mutter. They start to complain. They whispered in a critical tone among themselves, "This man, Jesus, he welcomes sinners and he eats with them." Yeah, he does. They meant this as a criticism. But this is why Jesus came. To see, to sit with, to hang out with, to save those people who were far from God, who had wandered off. And Jesus said, I have not come to condemn the world, but to save the world through everyone who believes. And so he does two things in this moment. He welcomes and he eats with them. Notorious sinners, notorious people who had lost their way, who had wandered off. He welcomes them and he eats with them. Can I ask you really quick, do you do that? Do you do that? I really have to stop and I really have to ask myself, do I do this? I guess I could make a case for being welcoming or being kind to people who maybe the religious community has ostracized, but how often do I sit down with someone who is maybe different than me or believes different than me or lives different than me and share a meal with them? And by them, I mean people that the church, that the religious community in that time would often not have anything to do with, or people who test my patience or your patience, who are hard to talk to. See, we're all sinners. And Jesus welcomes them and sits with them and shares a meal. Do you do that? When's the last time you did that? That word welcome is an interesting word. It doesn't mean like to put up with or reluctant acceptance. That word welcome means an open-armed embrace. An open-armed embrace. That word that they use to criticize Jesus, they say he open-armed embraces tax collectors and sinners. They meant it as a complaint, but Jesus takes it and he says, yes, this is why I am here. I am here. That word would be used usually in a family context. About maybe a mom or a dad who is welcoming home a son or daughter who had wandered away or who had been gone on a long journey or who had lost their way in life, who chases them down and embraces them. And they look at Jesus and they say, this man welcomes tax collectors and sinners and he eats with them. See, they aren't sure what to do with that. How does Jesus have eyes for people like this who maybe aren't living a perfect life in the eyes of the perfect people? How does Jesus have eyes? It's because he saw people as made in the image of God. He really saw people and he valued people, and they weren't insignificant or bothersome to Jesus. They were people, and every single one of them mattered to Jesus. There are so many times in life that you and I can treat people based off of the behaviors that we see in the people, based off of what they say or what they do or what they do for a living or what they make or what they drive or what they look like or what we know them as. We treat people based off of their behaviors. But Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus sees people differently. He cares for the one. And so he says in verse 3, Jesus hears their complaint, and then he says in verse 3, you know what, I'm going to tell you a story. It says, then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Jesus kind of hears their complaints and their mutterings, that he welcomes sinners and eats with them, and he goes, I'm going to tell you a story. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and you're a shepherd and you lose one of them. Now, I don't know the answer to this question because I am not a shepherd. But I know in my mind, and maybe in your mind, I kind of go 1 out of 99. Either, number one, it doesn't really matter. I have 99 sheep. Sheep breed sheep, so I'm going to have more sheep on top of the one that wandered off and lost. Or number two, you go, well, that's the sheep's fault. You get what you deserve. You have that attitude with some people, like you reap what you sow, like you're living in the wake of your decisions and you're wandering off into life. Or what's it matter to me? It's not really my problem. It's not really my problem. You ever seen someone maybe on the street or ever interacted with somebody who's having a really hard time or is really like seems like their life is really falling apart, and have you ever felt or thought that response like, it's not my problem? Man, they got a lot of problems, but it's not my problem. Why should I care about that dude? Why should I care about that girl? Why should I care? What's it matter to me? See, Jesus tells them a story and says, suppose if you has 99 sheep, one goes missing. One insignificant sheep that wanders off. What's your response? Jesus doesn't see the way maybe sometimes you and I see. He says in verse 4, doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one lost sheep until he finds it? Oh yeah, that's what I would do. I would go after the one sheep. That's the right answer. Jesus says, doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? In verse 5, and when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and he goes home. Then he calls all of his friends and his neighbors together and he says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who do not need to repent. Jesus sees every single one like a family member has gone missing. Jesus sees every single one of us like a sheep who has wandered off, and your response or my response may be like, well, it's just one, or man, they're getting what they deserve, or it's not really my problem. I'm kind of busy. I got a lot of things going on. Maybe I should. Jesus says, I'm chasing after the one. I am leaving the 99 and I am chasing after the one. And when I find that one, I'm calling my friends and I'm throwing a party like a dad would for a son who goes lost, like a mom would for a daughter who's been lost or trapped or far away. I value the one. Jesus sees every single one like a child is in danger. I remember several years ago, and forgive me if I've told this story before, but several years ago, my family and I, we were at Avila. It was a great day on the beach. And, we've got our LaCroix, we've got a book, we've got the kids, got the sunburn. It's beautiful. And in the middle of our peace, in the middle of our day off and our just kind of resting, we noticed some commotion about 100 yards down the beach. And we hear this dad just screaming his son's name, Adam, Adam. And he's looking through the crowd, and he's looking through everything, and he's asking people for help. And then he turns and he looks at the water, and he runs into the ocean, and he dives down below, and he's thrashing in the water, and he's just screaming for 10 minutes. People start to get involved, and people are standing up, and we're standing up looking for Adam, and people are diving into the water, and there is just this gut-wrenching, like soul-sinking feeling that fell on everyone. Finally, after 10 long minutes of panic and many people scrambling around looking for this little 3-year-old boy, someone comes running from up by the road with a small boy towards his dad. And you see this man fall to his knees and embrace his son. Jesus sits with a group of people that others have ostracized or overlooked or have typecasted or have branded as too far gone and too lost, tax collectors, sinners, and he open arm embraces them. He eats with them, and he sees them as one because it was his priority. It was his problem. Their problems were his problem, and he encountered them one at a time. See, Jesus is criticized by the way that he open arm embrace and welcomes these lost sinners. And then he tells a story about a sheep that wanders away. And he goes, I want to tell you what God is like. You think you know what God is like, but let me tell you. God leaves the 99 and he chases after. He pursues the one. Why? Because one matters to God. Every single one matters to God. I want you to hear that again. Every single one matters to God. Every single person is significant. Every single person is worth pursuing. Every single one is worth rescuing. Every single one is worth redeeming and restoring and putting back together and repairing. And every single one is worth celebrating. This is how God looks at you. This is how God looks at others. This is what Jesus teaches us. And then Jesus does this. Not only in this moment when he's welcoming tax collectors and sinners, but there was a time when Jesus again was living his life. He was walking through town and people had heard of him, not because of like a TikTok reel or not because of a commercial or an ad or a YouTube clip, but because people kept running into Jesus, and one at a time, they were experiencing this radical love. They were experiencing his overwhelming attention. They were experiencing his eyes and his intentionality. And Mark's gospel tells us that a large crowd, as Jesus makes his way into the town, a large crowd starts to follow Jesus and starts to press in around him. Read Matthew chapter 9 with me. Verse 20 through 22. It says, as the large crowd followed and pressed in around him, just then a woman who had been sick, who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, if I could only touch his cloak, I will be healed. And Jesus turned and saw her. Take heart, daughter, he said. Your faith has healed you. And the woman was healed at that moment. Jesus is moving through this town. A large crowd gathers, and in the middle of this crowd, there is one insignificant one. And we get a glimpse at her story. For 12 years, she has had this affliction. She has had this ailment. She was constantly bleeding or hemorrhaging. And we might feel uncomfortable reading this, but she would have felt this uncomfortability around everyone and around herself because of her condition. She would notice everybody else's discomfort when she would come around because for 12 years she was constantly bleeding. She was uncomfortable and she was unwanted. And because of this, she's in this really desperate place. She's in this really dejected place. Because of this, she is isolated and cut off. Jewish law would have regarded her, or disregarded her, rather, as ceremonially unclean. And in order to be seen, ever, or to be clean or valued or accepted again. The bleeding would have to stop. It would have to go away. But this wasn't her reality. Every day she bled. And every day she was counted as unworthy, unclean, unlovable. For 12 years she suffered. She was socially isolated. She wasn't around, she was religiously isolated. This would have been grounds for someone to actually abandon her and divorce her if she was married. It would have been a reason why no one would marry her because of this condition. Can you imagine how isolated and uncomfortable and unwanted she must have felt? And then she hears that Jesus is making his way through town. And she sees this crowd whip up, and there's this frenzy around Jesus because a lot of people had need. And she tells herself, I'm just insignificant, I'm just unwanted. I am a picture of uncomfortability and unlovable. And I know, but there's this thought in her, if I can just get close to Jesus, if I can just touch his robe, maybe there's a chance that this ailment goes away. Maybe there's a chance that this pain will end. And there's so many people pressing in around Jesus. Have you ever felt like that before? Have you ever felt like this woman in Matthew chapter 9? Maybe you've had a thing in your life, a physical problem, a nagging injury, or a diagnosis, or maybe an emotional pain or a wound from a relationship, and it's just been there forever. And it makes you uncomfortable, maybe makes other people uncomfortable, but this pain is just unbearable. And you've just learned to live with it. You've learned to live looking at yourself like this in light of your pain. You've learned to just bear it. I talked to somebody this past week whose dad walked away from the family in a pivotal time in her life. And she said, it hurts so deeply. And I have tried to stop hating him. But I don't know a way not to hate him. I don't have a way to heal from this pain. I don't like talking about it. I don't like facing it. It's just something I've lived with, this underlying resentment and hatred my whole life. Have you dealt with something like that maybe you've lived with? Something that hurts you, or something that made you uncomfortable, something that made you feel unloved or unwanted or unseen? This woman for 12 years has bled. And she presses through the crowd, and she finally is pressing through this group of people, and she reaches out and she touches Jesus's cloak, thinking that maybe this will work. If I can just get close to Jesus, if I can just touch Jesus, maybe I can get his attention. And something incredible happens. We read that Jesus turns and he sees her. He locks eyes with her in the middle of this crowd. Everyone else is uncomfortable and uninterested in her, but Jesus stops. I can tell there's this frenzy going around. It's probably difficult to hear. There's possibly Jesus could have been distracted or could have been caught up in the crowd, but he turns and he locks eyes with her. He's concerned with her. And his attitude and his attention turns towards the one. He sees her. Turn and he saw her. Don't miss it. Jesus turns and he saw her. There is power in being seen, isn't there? There is power in being seen. Several weeks ago, I had a fairly rough week. Was struggling through some feelings in the midst of being a dad and a husband and a pastor of a church, and in the middle of it, I was just wrestling with all of these things. And in the middle of it, I received an email from another pastor around the country, a good friend, and he didn't write anything crazy, but for some reason, it hit me. Now, I hadn't had a good cry in a while. I don't cry a lot, but I read this letter, and I had this mini breakdown, and I'm teary, and I'm crying, and I'm talking to Jenna, and Jenna looks at me, and she's like, what did he say? I'm like, nothing. He said nothing. He basically said, I know what you're going through, and I care about you, and I know what you're feeling. And for me, that acknowledgement, that little note, something that simple, that intentionality, that attention made me feel yeah, you get it. You get me. You understand. You see what I'm going through. You see what I'm in, and you care. You see, there is power in being seen. And Jesus could have moved through the crowd. He could have played to the crowd. He could have been like high-fiving everybody, and he could have said like, turn on the hype music and the haze machine, and hey DJ, play Joy to the World. But this woman, desperate in her desperation, reaches out for Jesus, touches his robe, and he turns and he sees her. She has this need to be healed, and she reaches out for Jesus, and he stops and he turns and he locks eyes with her. He sees her, and then he speaks to her. The socially isolated, desperate woman. And he gives her his eyes, and he gives her his heart and his attention. And he calls her daughter. Daughter. He says, daughter, get this, daughter. Not discarded, not disregarded, not divorced or damaged goods or unclean or unworthy or too far gone or messed up, but daughter of God. This is what Jesus says. And in that moment, she was healed. She was healed. He gives her his attention. And publicly in front of this whole crowd, he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Why does he do this? So she would know that she was healed. So others would know that she was healed, and she could like live outside of this stigma and social isolation. So she would know why she was healed. It was her faith. It wasn't the robe. It wasn't just touching Jesus. It was her faith in Jesus that made her well. And so everyone would see that Jesus cares for the one. I love what Jesus teaches. That everyone matters to God, that God will chase down the one, leave the 99, and celebrate when he open arm embraces the one who wanders off. And then I love what Jesus does throughout his life. In the middle of the crowd and all the hype and all the people who are pressing in on him, trying to get him to do what they wanted him to do, he stops and he is interruptible, and he gives his eyes to the one who desperately needs it. Because everyone matters to God. Now, I don't know what happens to this woman. We don't have that in the New Testament. We don't know like where she goes from here or what she does. We don't read about the impact or the influence she had or she might have had. But I can bet that the one at a time way of Jesus impacted her, changed her heart, made its way into her heart, and probably led her to see those around her like she was seen by Jesus. This one at a time way. I think about a lady in our church who I won't name. She knows who she is, who had walked through horrific domestic abuse, who has been seen and rescued by Jesus, who every time we share a story of abuse or neglect or someone who is sick or lonely or afraid from stage or our one-from-ones, she'll drop a Connect card in a little black box in the parking lot, and she'll just say, I can go sit with them. I can bring a meal if you want. I've been there. I want to care for that one. I think about a guy in our church who battled addiction to pornography in the past and has really battled through it and ran into Jesus and found Jesus chasing him down and ransoming and rescuing his heart. He saw Jesus fight for him and fight for his eyes and fight for his attention and lift him up out of shame and guilt and embarrassment and self-hatred. And now, he's leading a sex addiction recovery group. And he can't do a lot, but he can do that. He can do one. He can invest in those guys who sit in this room looking for help, one at a time. I think about many people in our church who have responded like, I don't know what I can do and I don't know what I have, but I work with, I'm good at construction. I can work with wood and I can help build things for people. I can help repair things, like just one at a time, because Jesus has seen me, seen you, seen us, and he's called us to see others one at a time and make a difference and make an impact in that way. And I think about the opportunity for you and me, first to be seen by Jesus, and then to see others the way Jesus sees them. Get this. We can live our lives to be happy. We want to make a difference. We want to, all these things. Jesus changed the world, not with a big speech or a big rally or a better slogan. It wasn't public debates or Instagram posts. It was seeing people one at a time, valuing people one at a time, loving people one at a time, counting every single one as significant, saying that every single one matters to God. And in the midst of every crowd and the chaos of life, in the middle of all the noise and distractions, Jesus had eyes for the one. What does this mean for you and me? It means that Jesus has eyes for you, that you matter to God, that you are the one that he will chase down, he will push, he will pursue, he will fight for, he will rescue, he will save, he will celebrate when you open arm embrace the goodness of God. And it means that we can live this one at a time way in our life. I can sit down with somebody for coffee and lock eyes with them. I can stop in the middle of a crowd and notice and say, God, give me eyes for the one. Give me eyes for one person in my life today that you want me to take time with, to walk with, to give my eyes to give my, just one person today, God, that I can share my faith with or share my struggles with or share my journey with, to try and encourage them, to try and impact and change the world, one person at a time. And as we wrap up, maybe you are like that woman. Maybe you are like those tax collectors and sinners. I'm there. That has maybe wandered away from Jesus, wandered away from the faith, maybe never even been rescued. I would just love to invite you. If that's you, would you see that God sees you, that you matter to God, and that you can receive him now as Lord and Savior of his life? Not that you have to do anything. You just have to turn around and look to Jesus, who's already pursuing you, who's already locking eyes with you, who already is calling you son and daughter. He wants to rescue you. He wants to pick you up. Every single one matters to God. You matter to God. Would you receive Jesus now? And just pray, Jesus, I give you my heart. I give you my heart. And I'm going to live one day at a time. And maybe you find freedom for the first time in your life. May we live this one at a time way of Jesus. May we see we are that one. Let's pray. God, we love you and we thank you for today. We thank you for your goodness and your grace and the way that you see one person at a time, how you want to make a difference in the world one person at a time, and how you want to rescue us one person at a time. We love you. It's in the powerful name of Jesus that we pray. Amen.